Hello, I'm Infamous Sphere. What's that? It's time for Infamous Queer!
Pride, darling, pride, 95!
Ah, the military. Militaries all over the world have, at some point, been unsafe environments for gay people, while simultaneously providing an environment in which people were more likely to do gay stuff, because, situational sexuality is a thing. Most of the world's armed forces have had, or still have, policies against LGBT people serving openly in the military. But today we're going to be focusing specifically on the US.
In the US military from the 1940s onwards, gay people were routinely dismissed when they were found to be queer, since homosexuality was considered to be a mental illness as well as a criminal act.
Also, the presence of gay people in the military was thought to cause low morale.
The discharge given specifically to queer people was known as a blue discharge, and was neither honourable nor dishonourable, but it did mean that the recipient wouldn't get any military pension, and the fact that they were queer became common knowledge to those at home.
Oh, and it was a stigmatised discharge, so it made it harder for them to get a job afterwards. So that was fun too! There were subsequent hilarious and terrible loopholes and attempts to address the question of homosexuals in the military, including the hilariously named Queen for a Day ruling, which stated that if you were caught having sex with someone of the same sex, you were both okay, so long as you could make it clear that you weren't usually interested in having sex with people of the same sex. What does that even mean?
Later, the military realised that the stigma of being gay had decreased sufficiently that, combined with an unpopular war and conscription, pretending to be gay in order to avoid service was beginning to seem very attractive to reluctant recruits.
But the military still thought that the presence of queer soldiers would cause low morale, and so they thought of the perfect way to control it. Don't ask, don't tell. Basically, we won't ask you if you're queer, which is something that previously would have come up during the recruitment process, and you don't tell us whether or not you are. Because if you can effectively hide your gayness, then nobody has to know, and people can safely go about their business happy in the knowledge that no one in their unit will hit on them when they see them sexily eating a hoo-ah bar or something.
Hey, try one.
Oh, try one? I don't mind if I do. I haven't had one all day. This is great. Hoorah, boys.
Flawless. What a perfect plan. So perfect, in fact, that the military created a comic in order to explain exactly how this policy was supposed to work. This is dignity and respect.
There's something about a soldier, something about a soldier, something about a soldier that is fine, fine, fine.
Ah yes, dignity and respect. This astounding comic was released to soldiers in the early 2000s, and when I saw it, I immediately knew that I had to review it. After all, who's more qualified to talk about the treatment of LGBT people in the US military than someone who isn't American, isn't in the military, doesn't have any family members in the military, and was a small child when this policy was implemented? My experience of the military is limited to watching ration reviews on YouTube and reading newspaper articles about royal commissions into rape and sexual abuse in the armed forces. So as long as this comic features the consumption of an MRE, or an examination of a culture of abuse that creates an unsafe environment for soldiers even outside of being in a war zone, I'll be set! My suspicion is that there'll be far more of the latter than the former. If only this were a comic warning people not to eat the cheese omelette, a situation far more dangerous for unit cohesion and morale than the presence of a gay soldier.
Now, this is widely regarded as one of the worst MRE menus in existence. Oh, why? Why?
A preemptive apology to Americans for any of the voices I end up using in this comic. Let's begin.
The front cover features a row of gigantic choose-your-own-adventure heads hovering over a field of tiny military vehicles, while a plastic army guy parachutes down in the distance. Except they can't be choose-your-own-adventure heads, because in this comic you have no choice. All of the people look slightly melted, and they have no bodies past their shoulders, but despite their unfortunate appearance, we should of course treat them with dignity and respect. A training guide on homosexual conduct policy. Actually, maybe that should be and dignity and respect, as that ampersand is doing double duty. Just awful. Let's move on. Success in the army depends on teamwork. Without trust, cohesion and morale in your unit will suffer. The purpose of this magazine is to help soldiers and leaders understand the don't ask, don't tell policy. Such understanding is essential to unit cohesion and high performance.
You can tell that it's a logical policy, and it's so easy to understand by the fact that this comic has over 30 pages. As a consequence, I'll be speeding through some of them.
There are 3 main stories here, such as they are: conduct, which is when somebody catches you doing a gay thing; admission, which is when you say that you are afflicted with a bad case of the gays; and harassment, which is when someone else says that you're afflicted with a bad case of the gays. Now let's hope that the people in these scenarios are treated with the dignity and respect they deserve. After all, our mission is to comply with the law that prohibits homosexual conduct while at the same time respecting the privacy and dignity of every soldier.
Clearly this is something that's possible. It's totally possible to require someone to hide who they are and also respect them as a human being, right? Right?
The next page shows a group of young soldiers viewing a really implausibly printed giant notepad bulletin board thing. Our commanding officer, or whoever he is standing at the front of the room, his arm bent awkwardly across his body, in a way that indicates that the artists didn't try at this pose themselves before they drew it. Good morning, soldiers. I'm Major Rivers. Today's training, Dignity and Respect, is part of the Army's effort to get the word out about homosexual conduct policy. The topics we are going to cover are listed on this chart. Dignity and respect. Today's training: 1. Conduct. 2. Admission. 3. Harassment. The Army has a very basic policy. Don't ask, don't tell. We'll start here by summarizing this policy. Then we'll present 3 stories that illustrate how the policy is supposed to work. Marvel, if you will, on the various proportions of everyone's faces in the crowd. This young woman here has a head that's too small for her face, something the artist has tried to disguise by the judicious placement of hair. On the other hand, this woman over here has a head that's about 3 sizes too large for her body, and the guy in the back looks like Mount Rushmore. Generic white guy in the centre and Major Rivers are the only people who are drawn in a way that even approaches being okay, although Major Rivers does have a bit of a John Barrowman smirk going on. Disconcerting. Once again, it's emphasised that this policy is about treating all of our soldiers with dignity and respect.
Here's a fun game. Drink every time these 2 words are mentioned. Actually don't, because you might end up requiring a liver transplant.
Next page. Ah! Let's move on. In the next panel, some poor person with clown balloon arms and an off-model doll head asks Major Rivers for clarification, while the other 2 people in the room are conveniently hidden, so the artist doesn't have to worry too much about the proportions of their face. Just look at the guy peeping from behind the speech bubble, though. Shifty. Sir, I have a question. What exactly does don't ask mean? Don't ask means a soldier will not be asked to divulge or discuss their sexual orientation unless there is credible information of homosexual conduct. Let me also say, a person's sexual orientation is considered a personal and private matter. Soldiers shouldn't go around asking each other about their sexual preference. Sexual orientation is not a bar to military service unless it is manifested by homosexual conduct. Manifested by homosexual conduct. Manifested by homosexual conduct. Conduct. This is a story about homosexual conduct, informs Major Rivers' floating head, stylishly attached to a collar like a beheaded ghost with a taste for accessories. Sadly, this story about homosexual conduct will be a good deal less salacious than you'd hope. If you're expecting vividly depicted military-themed gay sex, you might have to look to Japanese wartime propaganda. Now, a lot of the dialogue in this comic is very boring, but the boringness and bureaucracy of it is part of what makes it so awful. So I'll have to read at least some of it. When you're finished reading this, you'll be able to define credible information, explain the process for investigating an allegation when the information is determined to be credible, explain the role of the commander and the chain of command in executing the Army's homosexual conduct policy, and explain the rights of an accused soldier. And our story finally begins, with a soldier entering the office of a man who's holding some huge green plastic shards. Oh, I guess that's a book. Sir, I have something pretty important to talk to you about, says a surprisingly credibly drawn soldier. Okay, ISG, what you got? Sir, Sergeants Hall and Johnson just came to see me. They apparently witnessed a homosexual act involving PFC Howard and a soldier from another unit.
Do tell, says Sir, or he may as well.
After the ISG relays the sergeant's story regarding the homosexual act they witnessed.
What? We don't even get any of the details? This comic sucks! I'm going to go and write /fic about PFC Howard and the other soldier, and then I'm going to post it directly to the Pentagon.
You're right, ISG.
I looked up what ISG stands for, and there were about 43 different results, so I'm forced to conclude that it stands for Irritating Straight Guy. Hey-oh!
You're right, Irritating Straight Guy. This is both important and sensitive. I'd like to talk to Sergeants Hall and Johnson immediately. Then I'll need to talk with the battalion commander and consult with the SGA, the Social Justice Anarchist. After talking to the two NCOs, the commander feels further actions are necessary. Got to call the battalion commander, LTC Nichols, thinks this guy, while holding the phone to his carotid artery instead of his ear. No, seriously, who is this guy? Thank you, ma'am. I'll contact the Social Justice Anarchist right away. I'll update you when I see you later today. I will also inform the commander of the other soldier and provide him with copies of my NCO statements. As you know. Later, Captain Briggs dials again. Well, thanks for telling me who this guy actually is. Ma'am, this is Captain Briggs. We've had an alleged incident in the barracks involving one of my soldiers in a homosexual act. I've been looking over the AR, as well as the NCO statements. I certainly consider the NCOs who reported the incident to be reliable. Looks to me like I'll have to conduct an inquiry. Captain, you're quite right, says Major Juarez. Under the homosexual conduct policy, credible information is defined as a statement by a reliable person. That person may have observed a soldier engaged in a homosexual act, as your sergeants apparently did, or overheard the soldier admitting to be homosexual. Let's take a moment to look at the art here. Captain Briggs and Major Juarez are floating in this pastel green void straight out of Alfie's home. Forget PFC Howard's raging gayness. Major Juarez has some more immediate problems to worry about, seeing as her eyes are wonky and sliding off her face, and most of her body appears to be missing. When you speak to PFC Howard, inform him that, based on the statement of an eyewitness, he was allegedly seen engaged in a homosexual act.
The phrase, a homosexual act, appears in this comic rather a lot, possibly even more than dignity and respect. It's so absurdly official and clinical that it's beginning to grow on me.
Be sure to read him his rights. He has the full range of rights under Article 31 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. He has the right to legal representation by a trial defense service attorney or a civilian attorney retained at no cost to the Army. By the way, what are you doing about the other soldier involved in the incident?
Nothing, because I was the other soldier.
The next day in the commander's office. Sir, PFC Howard reporting as ordered. PFC Howard, I've received a report that you were seen engaging in a homosexual act.
Hey man, you'll never guess what I was doing last night. I was totally engaged in a homosexual act.
I consider this information to be credible. I'll be conducting an inquiry and would like to ask you some questions. So were you just going to let this random other guy eavesdrop on the conversation then? Oh well, it doesn't matter. He's probably just another ghost, seeing as he appears to be missing his lower body. Do you understand your rights as I explain them? Yes, sir, I do, but I don't understand what this was about. Captain Briggs then tells Howard that he can talk to an attorney or the chaplain confidentially in order to get counsel about this total non-crime he did. We'll then skip forward a few pages. PFC Howard reporting as ordered. PFC Howard, do you get this incredible sense of deja vu? Because I do. Did the last 2 pages even happen? Do you think everyone reading this comic has fallen asleep or started drawing dicks on us yet? I mean, your crotch is right there, and my head is pretty close, so it's a distinct possibility, and it would have a certain dramatic irony to it. Please don't take that as a suggestion, by the way. I understand that you had a chance to talk to military counsel. Is that correct? Based on my review of the statements by the Sergeants Hall and Johnson, and discussion of your chain of command, I have decided to recommend the initiation of a separation action. No, sir. I think that I will see my military counsel about that massive change in the proportions of my face. It happens whenever I open my mouth, and I'm quite concerned about it. ISG, make sure nobody gives PFC Howard a hard time. He has a right to privacy, except when he's being walked in on. This information should be limited to those who really have a need to know. A few weeks pass. Irritating straight guy, I just received words that PFC Howard's discharge has been approved. You may ask, what is credible information? Says Rivers, while apparently standing in front of a huge tank of lemon lime sports drink. What is credible information? A statement by a reliable person that he or she observed or heard a soldier engage in a homosexual act, or state that he or she was homosexual or bisexual, or state that he or she had married or attempted to marry a member of the same sex. A statement by a reliable person that he or she had observed or discovered a soldier saying or putting in writing a statement acknowledging a homosexual act or intent to engage in a homosexual act.
Once again, let's just acknowledge the fact that people were dismissed from the military simply for being gay, as if their gayness was some kind of miasma that ruined the rest of the military or something. There's no reason given for why you have to do this in this comic. You just have to, I guess. I have to wonder how many people specifically didn't dob in their queer friends, or, on the other hand, dobbed in people that they didn't like. Don't Ask, Don't Tell also caused a lot of problems when it came to reporting assaults, but we'll talk more about that later, because it sure as hell doesn't come up in this comic.
There's then a question and answer section. What is a reliable person? Oh god, look at your face! Look at your face! What is happening to your face? The commander must judge whether the person making the report is reliable.
Queerness can be very hard to define, especially when people aren't being obvious about it. If someone makes gay jokes, or makes one of those lovely threats about sexual violence relating to someone of the same sex, does that count as a confession of gayness? What about the homoeroticism that tends to flourish in a sex-segregated environment? A lot of this seems incredibly subjective, which doesn't bode well when you're talking about people potentially being fired.
If someone is accused of being a homosexual, does that always mean there will be an investigation or inquiry? No, under Department of Defense and Army policy, just the fact that a person is said or perceived to be a homosexual does not automatically constitute credible information or justify an investigation or inquiry.
Now here's where it would have been good to have some details about PFC Howard's case, because we don't know what Captain Briggs was told. We don't know what constitutes compelling enough evidence. All we have to go on is Briggs's word, which is the equivalent of a narrator showing up to tell you what happens to someone off-screen who we'll never see again.
Admission. This bit is all about chaplains, says Major Rivers' floating ghost head. In this story, you'll learn how to explain the consequences of a soldier admitting he or she is a homosexual. Now, I'm beginning to run out of American accents, so for this section I might just use my own, because fuck it. Chaplain, over the last few weeks we've talked a lot.
Man, this comic is the worst at telling rather than showing.
The visuals offer nothing except unrelenting horror at the never-ending parade of melting faces and ghost people missing important body parts. This could have just been written out like a maths problem. Major Rivers sees two people engaging in a homosexual act. He decides to use a probability tree to work out the likelihood that they are homosexual, and then using trigonometry, defines the shadow that this will cast over the soldiers' careers. Solve for X.
You almost wonder why they made it a comic at all. Anyway...
That is a serious decision. If you do decide to talk to your commander, she may have to discharge you for homosexual conduct under AR 600-20. But sir, I want to stay in the army. I feel I'm a good soldier. I like my duty and had planned to make it my career.
Well, you really should have thought about that before you became such a raging gay.
Speaking of confidentiality, you should know that with limited exceptions, anything you say to an army health professional, including a mental health professional, is not automatically confidential.
Well, I guess military doctors and psychologists aren't bound by the same rules as civilian ones, because fuck you!
Still, at least the artist had enough energy to actually put some furniture in the chaplain's office, as opposed to just making it a featureless void populated by ghosts. That bookshelf appears to be hovering, though. A few days later. Ma'am, I've been talking to Chaplain Ayres about my rapidly changing face. I currently look like a piranha, and that's just not right. Stop right there! Before you go any further, I want to be sure that you understand that, under the homosexual conduct policy, saying you're a homosexual can be a basis for discharge. Yes, ma'am, I understand. I have already talked with a legal assistance officer as well. The woman then suddenly becomes a Byzantine icon. Do you understand the Army's homosexual conduct policy?
We all fucking do. We've only been told about it 17 times already.
Oh, wait. Sergeant Williams? This is a totally different gay guy whose career is going to get ruined. I just assumed that this was PFC Howard and that the difference in his appearance was to do with the really terrible art. Blah blah, do you understand the consequences? Yes, I am a gay. Thank you for your time, ma'am. No need to thank me, Sergeant Williams.
Since you just fucked your career and all.
I love those huge empty musical staves on the wall behind them, though. So what are you going to do, ma'am? Based on Williams' statement, I'm going to awkwardly touch my chin. CPT Smith calls the battalion commander, and then the SGA. Major Storm, sir, this is CPT Smith. Apparently CPT stands for Captain. How come this woman is CPT and Captain Briggs was Captain? I'm considering a possible homosexual conduct separation against Sergeant John Williams in my command.
That'll teach him to compose film scores on the Army's time?
Yes, that's correct. He voluntarily admitted to me that he's homosexual. I've already spoken with the battalion commander, and he asked me to call you to obtain your consent concerning my actions from this point. Later that week. Captain Smith and this guy are awkwardly staring out the window like they're trying to ignore the raging sexual tension between them. How things going with Sergeant Williams, ma'am? After talking with the social justice anarchist, the battalion commander and I agreed to recommend discharge for Sergeant Williams. Rivers, now with a body, once again reminds us of the Army's regulations, while hovering in front of the chaplain's office so that he can overhear everyone's secret gay confessions. If you think it's number 2, you are correct.
You're right, it is number 2. It's pure 100% shit. Thank God I wasn't alive then. Oh wait, no, I was. Fuck!
Questions and answers. What does don't tell mean? Don't tell is the opposite of don't ask.
Wow, thanks for that, Rivers, you patronising fuck.
It means that the soldiers should not discuss or disclose their sexual orientation or conduct with other soldiers. Can homosexuals serve in the military?
Of course they can, as long as they pretend that they're not gay at all. It's a brilliant system and works super well.
Homosexual conduct creates an unacceptable risk to unit cohesion and standards of morale, good order, and discipline.
Holy fuck. Okay, if it's ruining some people's morale, maybe the problem is that these people are homophobic? I bet desegregating the Army really ruined the morale of some racist white guys.
Wouldn't admitting to being a homosexual be an easy way for soldiers to get out of the Army? Well, the fact that your eye appears to be sliding down one side of your face hasn't seemed to have harmed your Army career, has it, Milton? No, absolutely not, because I said so. If a soldier admits to being homosexual, the commander must examine sufficient information to determine the sincerity of the soldier. I'm now wondering how the commander gets the information, and all I can imagine is a porn scenario.
You want a discharge?
Hey, the rest of the company headed up over that ridge. We're alone.
If a soldier admits that he or she is a homosexual, will they be subjected to any harassment or other actions? Dignity and respect. Harassment. This story is about harassment, and redundancy, and harassment. When you finish reading, you should be able to identify that harassment of any type is wrong and is not tolerated.
We'll just ignore the military's culture of hazing then.
Recognize that harassment, including harassment based on perception of homosexual orientation, is unallowable behavior. State how Army leaders can deal firmly with harassment while respecting the privacy of soldiers. I am looking forward to a great weekend, says this woman flatly. Oh yeah? What are you doing? I have a date. You? A date? I would believe that Gates over there had a date with another man before I ever believe that you have a hot date. Well, to be fair, she never said that the date was hot. And come on, nobody made a comment about how Gates was really good at screwing. For shame! Hey Gates, would you enjoy a date with a good-looking man too?
Man, that is possibly the lamest, most watered-down sexual harassment of all time. It's also something that nobody would ever say, ever. Hey Sphere, bet you'd love to go on a date with a good-looking man. Sure, whatever.
It probably would have been something more like this. Gate sucks dick! Or, knowing what I know about some of the worst aspects of military service, here's how it also could have gone. A group of soldiers rape Gates. I bet you love that, you fag. The commanding officer then does nothing. Now here's where we get to one of the worst bits of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Forget the military forcing queer people to hide their sexuality, putting them under undue stress and pressure that their straight colleagues weren't subjected to. What's far worse is the impact that this policy had on the reporting of sexual violence.
He says, if you tell anybody about this, I'll tell them that you're a dyke. If you've ever served in a situation where sexual orientation is more important than sexual assault, you'll understand.
The military has a problem with rape. This is something that disproportionately affects female soldiers, but it affects men too. The military also has a problem with dealing with rapists. Briefly put, the fact that crimes committed by soldiers fall under the jurisdiction of the military, rather than civilian courts, means that the military has the capacity to cover up reports of rape and sexual abuse, since they can deal with the situation internally. Victims are frequently dismissed or forced to work alongside their rapists, whereas perpetrators often escape punishment, especially if they're higher up in the chain of command. Unsurprisingly, many victims don't want to deal with the humiliation and unpleasantness of reporting a rape, especially when they know that very little will be done to punish the perpetrator.
Don't Ask, Don't Tell made the situation even more horrible. Those male victims? If they reported being raped by another man, they had technically admitted to a homosexual act. Yes, being raped was apparently considered the same as being gay, which, need I remind you, was a fireable offence. You're gay? Fired. You were raped? Fired.
Thankfully, though, Gates is not raped, just subjected to a really lame insinuation that he's gay that was most definitely censored for this comic.
But this does not go unpunished.
What was that, Sergeant? I don't know, but my head just started wobbling violently. I think it might fall off. Somebody help me! I didn't like the sound of that. I want to see all of you in my office now. Sergeant Gates, I want you to know that I consider those soldiers' comments and behaviour to be inappropriate. We will not tolerate harassment of any kind in this unit. I'm not entirely sure whether the first sergeant would have really cared about Gates being harassed, but apparently insinuating that another soldier was gay was taken pretty seriously under Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
At least according to official policy. I have no idea how this situation would have played out in the real world.
So anyway, the irritating straight guy chews out the harassing soldiers for making lame gay jibes about Gates. Man, we really blew it. The ISG was really angry. You're not kidding. He was right, you know. We shouldn't have said that to Gates. However, making fun of me for going on a date is apparently not harassment at all. Am I right? Fuck you guys. A week later, Sergeant Gates is working late to fix a radio for a critical aircraft. I'm glad Gates is still our bro. No homo though. Ha 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 ha. Do you think the first sergeant was too severe with his soldiers? Harassment is a serious issue, and leaders have to deal with it decisively and promptly. The first sergeant took care of this incident by the book. He did the right thing for the morale and for the safety and well-being of his soldiers.
For once, I actually agree with this crap comic. Too bad the rest of it was about firing gay people for the terrible crime of their gayness.
There's then a page of bland and relatively okay advice about reporting harassment, which we can skip over, although it's worth noting that everyone on this page has those weird misaligned eyes that are a particular hallmark of this comic.
I wonder who the artist was. I'm going to say the unholy offspring of Rob Liefeld and the woman who illustrated Alfie's Home.
We'll skip over the next page too, and on to the final message. Every soldier has a right to fair, equitable and respectful treatment. Each of you has the right to expect treatment consistent with the Army's core values, a safe and secure environment, and the support of your chain of command.
Unless you're gay.
You, as a soldier, must ensure that your actions set the example of this treatment. Leaders at all levels are responsible for ensuring the soldiers in their charge are treated with dignity and respect. There is no room in the Army for harassment or threats to any soldier in the Army for any reason.
Unfortunately, I'm going to have to disagree. If this really were the case, the Invisible War would be a 3-minute short about soldiers playing tiddlywinks instead of the 97-minute investigative documentary about military sexual trauma that it actually is. There is too much room in the military for harassment, threats and violence against other soldiers, and there are too many perpetrators who escape punishment.
Harassment will not be tolerated, and our unit leaders must ensure that their units encourage all assigned soldiers to contribute to their unit's successes. Of course, if it's someone further up the chain of command who's harassing you, this won't help you at all. They can't even protect you from the helicopters about to crash into your giant head.
This comic is so many things. It's boring, full of tedious information presented badly. The art is ghastly. It's also incredibly hateful. The idea that LGBT people need to be dismissed from the military simply for being who they are is horrific, and the consequences that this policy had on the reporting of sexual violence is even worse. The harassment section is probably the least offensive, but it's also the most bullshit.
Take the case of Joseph Rocha, who served in 2005. He did everything he was supposed to, keeping his sexuality a secret, but he was cruelly harassed for 28 months.
I was bound to chairs, fed dog food, ordered to simulate gay sex on video with military working dogs around, and several other things for an entire period of 28 months when all I wanted to do was serve overseas.
Once I joined the Navy, I was tormented by my chief and fellow sailors, physically and emotionally, for being gay. The irony of Don't Ask, Don't Tell is that it protects bigots and punishes gays who comply.
As an 18-year-old who had just come out of boot camp, it would be a lot easier to discharge me for allegedly being gay than to take down an entire chain of command for corruption and harassment. And unfortunately, that's the situation that a lot of our service members find themselves in.
Don't Ask, Don't Tell was used to control people, to undermine the credibility of those who reported harassment or abuse. Often the abuse came from superior officers, and there was an incentive to dismiss the reports of victims, to believe those who had seniority over those who didn't. I cannot even begin to imagine the damage this policy caused.
I mean, thankfully Don't Ask, Don't Tell has been repealed and it's all over now. Yay!
So call me maybe. Hey, I just met you, and this is crazy. But here's my number. So call me maybe, and all the other boys try to chase me. But here's my number. So call me maybe.
For all the soldiers out there, good luck to you. I hope that nothing in this comic ever happened to you, and I hope that a few of the things that weren't depicted here didn't either. I'm going to leave you now with a message about harassment from Australian of the Year, Lieutenant General David Morrison.
Those who think that it is okay to behave in a way that demeans or exploits their colleagues have no place in this army. If that does not suit you, then get out.
So that was Dignity and Respect, a comic that was the very antithesis of its title. And now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go and watch another video of someone eating a freeze-dried meal out of a tray with a brown plastic spoon. There's more dignity in that than anything you'll find here.
I'm the only gay soldier left in Iraq, and I hunger for freedom like I hunger for cock. I'm the only gay soldier left in Iraq, and I'm tired and I want to go